All right. One of the coolest questions, comments I've ever gotten. I'm going to read it exactly. This is another interesting topic. Why some lures catch fish for decades and some do not. And the same goes for techniques. What a great, hard, impossible question to answer, and I love it. I love it. I don't even know if I have a good explanation as to why this is. I couldn't tell you. But let's dive in. When I first thought, let's think. For everyone out there, like, what comes to mind when you think about this? Because at first it's like, okay, worm catches them, okay, crankbait catches them, topwater catches them, spinnerbait catches them. Would you say those are the four longest standing techniques I would think out there, right? And they still catch them. And then, and it blows me away about how like a worm, after all these years, it still catches them. I would say just as good in the sense of compared, like, correct, you could have caught 100 of them back in the day, but there wasn't as much fishing pressure. So like you gotta take into fishing pressure into consideration with this entire question, right? So yes, years ago we could have caught 100 on a worm in a day, and you can't now. But you probably could have cranked up 100 in a day back then, and it's very hard to do that now, right? So fishing pressure has made fishing in general just get harder because there's more people doing it, and they're doing it at a consistent rate in the sense of, you know, throughout the week, tournaments, doesn't matter what it is. I mean, there's just more fishermen now than there were 30 years ago. And I would say probably most lakes aren't as good. And that's not because of people keeping fish or anything like that. It's just like a pond. It's just like anything else. Most lakes get worse over time. Rarely does a lake get better. The only lakes I know of that get better are lakes that fluctuate. Okay, Rayburn fluctuates, Toledo fluctuates, Amstead, Falcon, Choke Canyon. These are lakes by me. Any lake that fluctuates, and the more it fluctuates, the better it can become. So if it's a lake that drops down, O.H. Ivy, any lake that might drop down 30 feet for 8 or 10 years and then come back up, it gets better. Now, why is that? It's a new lake. It's a new lake with new growth. New things usually pop up. I mean, that's what it's a new lake. So my theory is right. New lakes are better when they're first built, and they tend to go down, and usually it's because of cover and I wouldn't say vegetation, but it's got a new growth to a lake is and how fertile it is. Like fertility is huge. It's why guys fertilize their ponds to make them stay healthy. The same deal, right? Dropping lakes, rising them, same deal. So if we get into that, I have no clue. There's a couple things that we have seen over the years come through. Obviously the Alabama rig, right? It came through. No one had ever seen it. It crushes them. It still crushes them. Still catches them. Just not as good. The swim jig, when I first started throwing the swim jig was merely for an on top of the water, kind of like a frog, over things. No one was throwing it out deeper. And when I say deep, even in 2 foot of water, but where you couldn't see it anymore. Right? I mean, yeah, you can throw it out there in 22, but the not where you visually can see your swim jig. I started doing this like 15 years ago. When I figured it out, it was freaking lights out. I didn't tell a soul about this for years. I just never would talk about it. It eventually got caught on around places, but I mean, I stopped throwing a spinnerbait. A swim jig would catch 10-1 to me on a spinnerbait unless the spinnerbait perfect conditions. Perfect conditions. I'm gonna bring back the perfect conditions thing. So the swim jig just caught them constantly for me, like on every lake I went to. For like 3 or 4 years, I made a living on a swim jig. I had it tied on for everywhere I went, and I was the only one throwing it. Only one. And I say that because I mean I just never saw anyone else throw it. This was years ago, back before it ever got. Yeah, no one was ever throwing it. They were throwing. It is even before the chatterbait, right? Way before the chatterbait. So the chatterbait came along too, and started competing. I still thought the swim jig was better than the chatterbait. I think the chatterbait hurt the swim jig bite, in the sense of I think they got so used to seeing a chatterbait, swim jig, spinnerbait, all those things that hurt the spinnerbait bite. So the swim jig hurt the spinnerbait bite, the chatterbait hurt the swim jig bite, and now all three of them compete against each other. Okay, and I guess I'll bring this up now. Except one thing, they compete unless the conditions are right. If the conditions are right, one of them will shine, and it will outshine the rest of them like crazy. So let's talk about those conditions. If it's cloudy and windy and rainy and things like that, and dirty water, spinnerbait's gonna kill the others. Like if they're on that spinnerbait bite and the conditions are right, can't beat a spinnerbait. If it's calmer and sunnier and you want that it's not finessier presentation, but no noise, no vibration, no nothing. You got a lot of cover around that swim jig, can't beat it. Doesn't get hung up. You can throw it around anything. It comes to the water nice and quiet. So can't beat it. When it's colder and that, you know, because I think it works a lot better when it's colder. But that chatterbait, when it's colder, and I'm not saying like freezing cold, but like cooler months, man, around things, that can't beat that thing. Drawing them to you, you know, but it's not a crate. It's clear water. They'll still eat it. Like there's times when that chatterbait will blow out the other two. It's all about conditions. And what I see is this: some techniques work better than others over long periods of time. What I've found though is a bait still produces if those conditions are right. Okay? Before it seemed like it didn't matter the conditions. All those new baits would just work. And then what happens is like what you find is there's conditions that suit a bait better than others, right? Well, it's usually nicer outside than it is nasty weather for a spinnerbait, right? So like a spinnerbait doesn't work as good possibly as a swim jig or chatterbait because the conditions are usually okay when you go fishing, right? I'd say, right, 8 out of 10 times are okay, 2 out of 10 times are nasty conditions. Well, that just looks like the spinnerbait's not going to be as good, but it just doesn't work because the conditions aren't as good. And same thing with like, if you want to bring up topwaters. Topwaters work great in fairly good conditions in the sense of they don't work really good in the wind, right? We love it when it's cloudy and rainy and stuff like that, but a lot of times when it is, there's storms coming through, so you got wind, right? So sometimes the wind hurts you more than the other things, but usually also topwaters will work really good when it's cloudy and nasty like that because the fishing's really good. So it probably wouldn't even matter. You can probably, like, guys catch them on a lot of different baits when it's like that because the fishing's really good. So that's what I'll say about like certain baits working longer than others. Like right now, right, the drop shot seems like it's always going to work, but the drop shot doesn't seem like it's as good as it used to be. But when guys first started throwing a drop shot, and when it came over from Japan, it was 100 fish a day. Now you can still catch 100 fish a day when the conditions are right, but back then it was like you could throw a drop shot and get a bite in 2 foot of water, 100 foot of water. It didn't matter. And now you can still get bit. It's just not as, it's good, but I'm just telling you, I mean, it's just not automatic. It was automatic for a while. And then it seems like the Damiki rig and things like that, this like suspended style is what's going on more nowadays. Weird baits like the glide baits really wasn't that good. People caught fish on them, but it really wasn't that good. It's gotten better because of LiveScope. Only because we're able to use the bait more effectively. But it was still never a bait. The glide bait never came on the scene and caught a whole bunch of fish. Just didn't. It caught some fish at very specific times. But it wasn't a bait you could just go out there and throw anytime you wanted to. We have other baits like that. I mean, when the Kitech or Rage Swimmer came out, I mean, golly, man. I mean, it was just, you just throw that thing on every lake at any time of the year and still get bit. I mean, it was like the Alabama rig, but, you know, I wouldn't say it was better. It's better now because that Alabama rig is only, I mean, it's very conditional now, right? It smokes on them. It's sometimes the only thing you can catch fish on, but you could throw that thing at any time of the year and catch fish. Now, not so much. That single swim bait, still to this day, you can catch them 12 months out of the year on that thing. 12 months. I don't care how hot it is, you can still get bit on it. So some of those, and why, I assume the swim bait, and when I mean the swim bait, like a rage swimmer, like a 3.75 rage swimmer or 3.25 rage swimmer on a jig head. I mean, golly, it's just, I don't see it going away. I see that bait staying around for the next 25 years. It's still going to catch fish. Maybe it's just because it's a shad. I mean, it looks exactly like a shad, and they will always eat shad or bait fish. It's kind of like the crankbait. You know, there's not a lot of other baits like it. Almost none. There's not another bait that gets down to a certain depth and stays down there, and for the most part runs on an even plane. Okay, and so that's kind of what we're learning with certain baits it's probably one of the hardest things to do is to get a bait to do that. Is to get a bait deep, stay down on that plane, right, that level plane, and stay there for long amounts of time. Crankbait's the only one you can reel fast. I'm trying to think real quick. I don't think there's another bait that we've ever made that can do that. That can do that one thing. And so that one thing will stand the test of time. Now, are they getting used to certain crankbaits and the way crankbaits look and the way they move and the way they vibrate? I think over time, yes, but I still think it's still limited, and I still think it's okay, and we're still going to be able to catch fish on certain crankbaits, and there will always be certain crankbaits that move differently and more maybe realistically to a fish, and I think that's just the way it is. Like I think our 6XD is a prime example of that. I don't see that bait going away. So that part I get, but there's some other parts I don't get, right? So that's one bait that kind of goes against the grain to a degree. It's still different though, because there's nothing else like it. But hear me out on this part. I was throwing a swim jig and everyone started throwing it. And I go, yeah, it's not as good as it used to. I can't go catch 50, 60 fish on it. But it was so good where at times I can't get a bite. Like for 3 or 4 years, I could go get a bite anytime I wanted to. Some days I might catch 50, some days I might catch 20, right? But I get a bite on it if I just threw it long enough. I can go throw it now and never get a bite on it at times, ever. And so when that started happening, I'm going, golly, man, this pressure thing, it has to be pressure. I noticed it stop being as good when everyone started throwing it. But here's the part I don't get. This is the part I can't explain. We live in this bubble where we think there's this group of fish on the lake, and we pressurized them all, right? All these fish, they all got pressured. But what about this like 12-incher, right? That he's 12, 13 inches in November, and he's out there swimming around deep. And he never sees a swim jig. And then he comes up shallow, the next year in the springtime, he's a 2.5 pounder. There's millions of those fish. There's millions of those 12-inchers out there deep that we never throw a swim jig by. They've never eaten a swim jig, never bit one. They come up there shallow, and there's new ones every year. Every year. So if nothing else, I would get those fish to bite. Like those fish should bite a swim jig. They've never seen one. Why don't those bite a swim jig? Because there's no way they all get caught. There's no way they got that much pressure on them. Why is it changed for them? That's the part I don't get. And I'm sure everyone, if you think of it that way, that there's always new fish being born, always new fish being brought into our system of what we do. And darn well there's some of them, and I don't care if they're big or small, There's some of them that are small, but they still eat. I mean, I've caught freaking 14,000 fish under 2 pounds on a swim jig. Why am I not getting small ones to bite? Why are those not biting now? And some guys might talk about, the genes get passed. I don't think that. I don't think the genes, like, they're smart enough not to bite a swim jig anymore, but they're going to bite all these other baits. I don't know. That's the only part I don't get. So this question is awesome, man. I love it. And I've never heard anyone, I understand the pressure and all those other things, but I've never really understood that one scenario of why a bait that you smashed on them on your lake. So they bite it on your lake. You know that they've always, that when it came around, it was so unbelievably phenomenal. And then, I'm not saying I can't get bit on a swim jig anymore. The conditions have to be absolutely perfect, though. But before then, I could catch them at any time I wanted to. But I know these younger fish haven't seen it. Or even if they had, they were too small to eat it at some point in time. And they go out deep and hang out there for the summertime for a couple months and come back and they're bigger. Why don't I catch those now? And there's always new ones like that filtering through our lake. We should still be catching those 2-pounders up there like that. Like I said, I am catching some, but it's nowhere near like it used to be. It's kind of a weird. That's the only one that bothers me. That I don't understand that one. That one's the one that blows me away. I think this is a great question. This might be the number one question so far I've gotten asked, or the one that intrigues me the most because maybe I don't know the answer to. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know. Hope you guys enjoyed that one. That one's. I can't wait to hear the comments on that one. I think some of the comments are gonna frustrate. Before you write a comment, guys, really, really do me a favor and really think about it first. Think about it from every angle. Every angle. I think about all these things from every angle. There's not usually an angle I never think about. So think about it from every angle before you make a comment. Because I'm going to read them. All right. See you guys.